Hi, and welcome to another ID Cyber Sessions. My name's Steve, and this is Alice, and today we are joined by...
Jenny Radcliffe. Jenny Radcliffe is a world-renowned social engineer who goes by the moniker The People Hacker. Jenny's new book, People Hacker, was recently released, so we are delighted to have her on our webinar today to talk about her job and her life and her new book. Firstly, Jenny, thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's my pleasure. Happy to join.
Thank you so much. You've done so many conferences, webinars and trainings. Why now write a book?
Because I've done so many conferences, webinars and trainings. And people kept saying, that like there was an educational element to what I do. And, we're always trying to make people more aware. But I kept getting asked to write it down. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to write down some of it and see if people like it when I've written it down, I guess. And then I was offered a book deal, and it felt like the time was right. So, I'm getting too old to do the job too much. So I can't keep falling off roofs the rest of my life, right?
So obviously you've detailed a whole bunch of different stories within the book. Are they your most memorable? Is there any that stand out more than the ones you've got in the book? Is there any sort of more memorable ones that for other reasons other than what's in the book?
Well, do you know what I did? I tried to answer the stories in the book that I get asked all the time. So I always get asked, how did you start? What got you into the job? What's it like being a woman in the job? And questions around diversity. And then I'm always asked, like, what's the funniest one, the most dangerous, the most bizarre? So I thought I'd write sort of the first half of the book is how I kind of started out and got into it and sort of sets what my mindset, such as it is like to do the job. And then I kind of just picked, a selection of jobs to sort of illustrate the range of things that I do and that social engineering actually is. So it's a memoir rather than autobiography. It's just like, okay, I'll just pick some. I wanted to show that some were dangerous, some were funny, that I did some on my own, I did some with the crews. And so really it was just a selection of those. And I also did I picked ones that I'd spoken about sometimes, and then a few that were new, that people had never heard me speak about. So really it was volume one, because of those, when I wrote and chose the stories I was going to tell, that was kind of the criteria. But I wrote a list, and I think sort of the best guess we have is that I've done about 600 social engineering jobs, and there's about 18 in the book, and maybe another 10 or 20 referred to briefly. So there's a lot more I could write about if I ever want to write another bit. There's scope for me to do some more. So.
That's what to say. Is there a volume 2 lined up?
God, not yet. Let's just get this out of the way first. Blimey.
Obviously, in the book, you talk a lot about jobs that maybe haven't gone quite how you would have liked, whether because when in your early jobs you maybe got a little bit ahead of schedule or whatever, or things weren't quite as expected in terms of your briefing and things like that. But they all kind of worked out in the end. But have there ever been any jobs that you've really regretted taking on and thinking, actually, maybe I shouldn't have taken that one?
There's a few. I mean, there's a few that we've been asked to do where the client... I kind of almost wish I hadn't helped the client because they weren't good people for whatever reason. So there's times, as you know, that things come to light years later about a company or about an individual in the press, because we do deal with a few sort of high net worth and celebrities and things that at the time it was just work, and we kind of looked at it and there was nothing in our due diligence that would have said that those companies were bad companies or that those people, were predators or whatever. And then later things come to light and you realise that, we've helped someone protect themselves that maybe, these days looking back and knowing what we know now, I wouldn't have helped them, right? So those are the type of jobs that kind of not regret, but you think, well, If I'd have known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have helped them. But you know, you can't always tell. You can do a lot of research. The benchmark I give, and I tell the crew, and anyone who ever works with me or I mentor or whatever, is as long as you do enough to be able to look in the mirror and it all goes wrong, and you say, well, what else could I have done, right? Did I do everything I can think of to make sure that these are good people and this is the right thing? Then you're okay, because we're only human, and we might miss something, but you can't. That's not an excuse if you don't put the work in. So we do a lot of research on our clients, and always have, to make sure that we're actually helping good people. But some of them slip through, right? They fooled everyone, so. Yeah, and I can't get, and I know that's so juicy. And you're like, what is she talking about? And I can't tell you that. So,
Volume 2, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there a time where you got caught and had to produce a get a jail free card, and it was just like, right, that's the only thing you could do at that point?
Oh yes. Like lots of times, I mean, but the thing is, we have to get out of jail free. And this, because I know that this is, largely a cyber audience, they probably heard me say it before, but you always have to get out of jail. You have the real one, which is that, oh my God, this is the number, ring the head of security, ring whoever it is. And that's genuinely the client who's going to say it's a test. But we also have one with a dummy number, which is the office, And so, I mean, I remember going into it was like an office. I'd say it's like an office. There was sort of production facilities on site, but it was mostly an office. And being in there, and it was going quite well. But what happens is when you're on site, and there's an energy in a building, and you kind of feel it when things change, right? I don't know why. It's like a sixth sense I have now. But it's like, it's all going well, then suddenly you think, it's going too well, it's gone a bit quiet, or it gets noisier, there's just this change. And so we're in this site, and we've been in there, a small crew, I think I only had 2 people with me, all good, all fine. And in fact, coming out and exit, and I just thought, no, something's wrong. I could just tell. And I turned a corner, and it was the security guard, and it was like, okay, yeah, he said, something like, I can't remember exactly, it was something like, why are you here, who are you? No, it won't wash, come with me. And I said, it's a fair cop. This is our letter. We've been hired by, and said the actual client's name, we've been hired by the client. And well done, good for you. You've spotted that we are not actually who we say we are. And, that's fine. Just ring this number, they'll verify everything. It's, I don't know, James Jones's office or whatever. So the guy does it, but when he rang, it rang my office. And it was like, James Jones's office. Oh, hi. You've rang this. All right. That must mean that you've managed to stop our security consultants. Well done. It's a test. Do us a favour. Don't let on. And just see if she can walk out the front. And if anyone else stops her. But well done, And there's doing like this mad dash out the front into the cars. And, so poor guy failed at the final hurdle. But that's part of the job, is that kind of prep, But then there's times when, you show them get out of jail. But I in the beginning, we never had those with us. I mean, ever. It's completely different now, thank goodness. We've got lawyers and contracts and very tight scope, I mean, as an industry. And it's much more sort of governed than it used to be. And I think as well, that's one of the reasons I wrote it now, is because I could see the way the industry was changing, and that the way that I did it, certainly in the beginning, doesn't really exist on the right side of the law anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's like we wouldn't have had insurance or anything in the start. And it's a good thing that it's better now and it's more regulated. But I wanted to show people what it was like back in the days when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and we were a bit more pirate in the way we approach things.
Yeah, and it's really interesting reading your stories, especially from the early days where it was just a bit more gung-ho and it's just straight in, basically. Talking about scoping, can you tell us a bit about the process where you are kind of scoping a job? And in particular, I think we have questions about, have you ever had an engagement where there have been really strict restrictions on times and locations and things, or maybe any jobs that you've actually had to turn down because of who you are, like a woman, and perhaps it's an environment where women would be just far too conspicuous, so you feel that you just can't take it on.
Okay, so there's two elements to that, isn't there? So the first one is like, we turn down as a business. I personally turn down on behalf of me and the people who work with me, probably about 70% of the jobs that we get asked to do.
Wow,
we don't do all that many infiltrations, and I always did turn down a lot of work, except at the start when I accepted everything, because we just did. But for a long time I've been very careful, partly because clients think they need physical infiltration. They don't always need that. Sometimes they want one because they want me to do it, so they can say that I've done it. And what they hope is either, right, so they hope either Jenny, we managed to stop Jenny, so that's great, or, well, it was Jenny, so we weren't going to stop it. They have these weird kind of reasons to get me to do it. And I can kind of try and sniff that out in a pre-job kind of meetings and stuff. But also some of them are very dangerous or very technical, actually. And, we say, well, you'd be better spending your money on a technical test, right? And I know that you've done that, but you don't need this. So we turn down quite a lot. When we scope something out, what I'm looking for, now it's like I have criteria. So I take jobs that either pay so well that you can't say no, really, or that there's some aspect of the job that's very interesting. So the building might be interesting, or the firm, or whatever. I'm just smiling because we had one, and they did not pay a lot, but I really wanted to get into the building. And then there's ones where it's a good cause, and you think, these people really need protecting. Either they're in danger or they're hopeless, and they've had threats, and they, we can kind of see it. So we used all those kind of criteria. One person who works with me says fun, love, and money, right? So you do it for those. So we turn a lot away, and I did, even though I said yes, it depended on who was asking and what the job was, and a lot of the time. In terms of whether or not we turn stuff down because I wouldn't fit as a woman, we don't. The way I've never worked is that we fit the job to the crew I've got. So the way I work is there's me and I have two other people who pretty much work with me continuously, and then outside of that, there's a sort of two circles of people. There's like my go-to circle of experts, friends, people I would ask to help. And then I have a wide network. And then sometimes we need someone from different points of view. So, for example, there are some former military guys I work with. They always want to blow things up and attack things. And in terms of the contract, sometimes one of the things we'll say is, do you want destructive entry? Or do you want non-destructive entry? In other words, will you let us blow the door off if we need to? Or do you want us to definitely not do that? And it depends what they're testing for and what their threat level is. It's always great fun if they do say that we can break things, because then, in my head, that means, Jimmy and the hinge or unscrewing like the door jambs and things. But the boys want to blow it up. So I wouldn't necessarily turn a job down because I didn't fit culturally, or that the demographic of the client was not my age or gender or anything else. But we do fit the crew to the job. So I'll say, okay, this is the client. The first job is assess the client and what might work, and then I'll fit the crew to that job. So if I need fence hoppers or whatever, because they've got high sight, then we'll go out and we'll get our parkour folk to do that. But I won't necessarily put myself in it all the time. But I am very controlling of the crew, and I'm very strict about the crew. So I wouldn't necessarily let someone else run the crew either. I'll usually run it remotely. So it's not really something that we say no to. And even in situations where, for example, ethnically I wouldn't fit. So if we were in a country where a white woman wouldn't necessarily be in that setting, I still have women on the ground who I can put in most situations.
That's brilliant. That's a great perspective, actually. And we had David Mackenzie on recently, and he was talking about, from a blue team's perspective, how just knowing the vehicle that someone drives can also give away so much, because obviously that was to do with they were actually trying to track where this data was flowing through, and it just so happened to be it was a senior member of management's car was getting an update every month, and it was leading on to a full security alert. So from a red team perspective, from a social engineering perspective, does having something as small as what car that person drives, that your target's driving, can that give you a lot of information to go on from your perspective?
Well, when we'd assess a company, right? We'd assess the whole company, the company culture, the macro environment of that company, because I want to know things like their recent history. And I say it in talks, but I want to know the heroes, the villains. I want to know who likes who hates who, what's going on. Are the layoffs coming? Has there been a takeover? What product they're working on? Because by the time we get into a site, we want to be really well informed, and we gradually narrow it down to individuals. Now, if you are, and I say profiling in the UK sense here, because I don't mean profiling as though we were talking about racial profiling or anything else in the States, perhaps, and elsewhere. But if I'm profiling an individual, we would look very carefully at someone's environment, the environment they create. And you can tell, you learn to be able to tell what someone's like from things like their car, things like what they eat when they're on their own, gives you a lot of information. So if you think about what you eat when there's no one else there, you're not cooking for everyone, and no one is watching you, right? So is it a pint of ice cream? What dinner do you cook for yourself if you've got the choice, you're on your own? Things like that tell you quite a bit about somebody, I think. But also the things like their desk, their office, and their house. And what you're actually looking for in terms, it depends on whether it's a corporate job or it's a different area, if you like. There is such a difference between a staged environment, right? So someone who thinks, if someone looks at this room, I want them to think I'm neat and tidy, so therefore they tidy the desk. And someone who actually is neat and tidy, right? By character, by personality. And so those are the types of things that we would look at and then decide whether or not we would assess that and incorporate that into the story of the con, right? So someone who is staging tidiness, we would look at why they feel the need to do that. As opposed to someone who just is tidy and what that says about their big 5 psychological traits, basically. So how fastidious, how extrovert someone is. So it's all those types of things. And just when I'm saying it now, please do not pester me for this, because this will come when it comes. But when we teach this, I do have, at some point, a whole module on that in the social engineering stuff that I want to eventually teach someone, but it's not ready, so don't ask. I will announce it when it is. But one of the things is assessing someone's environment, and that means everything from the way you wear it, what you present, to the environment that you inhabit, and what we can tell from someone's personality. And that is one of my favourite modules, right? So I've got a lot of modules that are already kind of outlined and half written, but people love that one. Because you can really, and you have to look at what's beneath the layers, right? Sorry, I know I'm waffling a bit and it's not really a question, but one of the things I found, and I talk about it in the book very briefly, is I got into an office one time. The guy's office was very normal. It wasn't neat, tidy or anything. It was just a normal someone's office. But underneath a lot of the pictures that were on the walls, the charts and the kind of company stuff, when I looked behind them, there were maps of the office with red marks on and things. They'd been plotting stuff out behind the pictures. So almost like, if you think of those movies where they press a button and everything turns around and it's like a villain's cake, like a Batman or something. But what this guy had behind them was all these plans of offices and people's commutes. So women he worked with and the commute that they had, and all mapped out. So we could just turn it around and look. And lots of keys. So keys hidden under everything, glued underneath coasters, sellotape to the back of cabinets, people's house keys and stuff. Now, what I wanted to teach people, and one of the things that is quite important when we're doing that kind of investigation, is what are the signals in that room that makes me know that that's not right, you know, and it's to do with how you sweep somewhere for hidden devices and things like that. It's having that eye. Yeah. So that's a long answer, but I just think that this audience probably be like, yeah, that's interesting, right? So that's one of the things that we do. I've not really spoke about that before, but that's one of the things that we look for in things like cars, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think like thinking as a social engineer is a totally different mindset. A lot of the time, you know, like going as a cyber professional or any other type of security professional, but thinking as a social engineer, it's a totally different kind of mindset.
Yeah, and actually it's not a question, but it just reminds me of one of my favourite passages from your book, which is where, because I felt like a lot of the things that I was reading, I was like, oh yeah, I can see that. Like, and it was like, I would never personally have thought to put all the things together. It was, oh yeah, I can see that. But then there was one particular bit, and you spoke about trying to get the target out of their office for a longer period of time. So when they offered you a coffee, you said, "Yep, can you make it a decaf?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Wait, what?" And then you explained, and it's because it just takes people longer to make a decaf coffee, but they wouldn't have questioned it. And it's those little things. It's like I would never have thought of that, but it makes so much sense when you actually think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're in those situations and you've done it for as long as I have, you just learn. It's just little tricks to buy yourself some time or buy yourself some space, you know. And it might, you might have a jar of decaf next to the normal, but it's just you're trying to give yourself the edge. You find slicing opportunity all the time, and you know, you just said there, but it is a different mindset. And I think from the technical people I know and work with, and the stuff that I have seen, we are still gathering data and looking for breaks in patterns and looking for unusual activity. But a social engineering mindset will then look for what is the story behind all of that, and how can that story now be used to get through or to achieve whatever objective we've got. And it's fine. And that's why I was actually speaking to someone last night in an interview as well, and I said, the thing is, that's the thing. People sometimes say, oh, it's so easy. You know, some of the things you do are so easy, like putting the paper on the door or whatever, which I'll talk about if you want to ask me later, but everyone wants to talk about that story. But it's not easy, it's simple, right? And the reason there's a difference is that you have to know from everything that you observe and gather what will work in that environment, right? And you have to make assumptions, test the assumptions where you can, and then make sure that you're putting the best guess forward if you can't test it. And that's the difference between a social engineer and someone who works more technically, I think.
So
because we're relying entirely on reading that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the paper on the door, I know exactly what story you're talking about, but it is brilliant. So would you like to tell it just for our audience who probably don't know of it?
Oh God, everyone's here. I'm sure, like I've said this so many times, and people are probably bored of it. But all it was that we were asked to get past an expensive perimeter that had only just been put in and cost millions, a couple of million quid, 2 million quid, I think. And the guy had just said to me, I'd worked for him before, and probably will again. I probably won't again now, actually. But I'd worked for them before, and he said, you just can't get in. He said, because it is, and it was really good, like it was sealed. And he said, the only way you'll get in is if they leave a door open. And basically, we pretexted our way past security and this ridiculous, well, it was a van with a sign basically saying that we did auto repair, and we'd smashed out a windscreen in one of the pool cars at the rear of the car park. It said that we were there to repair the car, but while we were there, we put a sign on the door saying, please don't close the door. And of course, because what we knew was they were quite a rule-driven, obedient workforce, because there was lots of health and safety considerations on site. Basically, if someone put a sign, you did what you were told. And so the guy came out and left the door open, you know, that's how we got in. But one thing I did an interview for, I think it might have been the Lab Bible one, where I told that story in a bit more detail. And someone on LinkedIn posted underneath and said the FBI did something similar years and years ago and said, you know, stay out of this cupboard or something. I can't remember what it was. And I was so happy that because I never knew that. I was so happy that at some point I was thinking along the same lines.
It's the
It's
FBI.
the FBI. But it works. And I do see those signs on doors all over the place. Whenever I see one, you know, in hotels and things or conferences, I always take a picture of it.
Yeah.
Because people just do. Don't shut the door. The latch broken. Don't shut door.
Yeah.
People don't. You
Or
know,
use
and,
other
and,
door.
it's funny because it's one of the things I teach crews as well. The reverse of that is, and the caveat to this is, you know, I'm telling you this just for, you know, the purposes of information, not to tell people to do it. But, you know, signs lie, right? So for example, you'll often be on a site, and one of the first things we do, and we'll do it on often on like a rehearsal, like a dummy run before we go in. So we'll go in, and then we'll wait, and then we'll go in properly, but we'll go and do reconnaissance. I will say, sometimes the door will say on it, alarmed, you know, no entry alarmed. And there are ways to tell whether that's true. You know, what mostly it is security by deception. It's saying to people, don't go this way or this way, because we don't want you to, right? It might be a health and safety issue, or, you know, you just want to funnel people a certain way. You know, fire escape alarmed. They're not always alarmed, right? So from a crew point of view, we teach, God, again, another module, but we teach people you know, you have to assess whether that door is genuinely alarmed and why they're telling you not to use it. Because sometimes you need, you know, 2 or 3 exits on the site, you know. But as you know, if you've read the book, sometimes they bloody are alarmed. And all hell breaks loose if you open them. So you have to really know what to look for, you know.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
So true.
So social engineering is all about deception, and obviously you are now you're very well known in the kind of cybersecurity industry and things like that, and you attend kind of a lot of events. And how do you gain the trust of the community or a client when they know your entire remit is persuasion and lies? How do you convince them that you're not working when you meet them?
You don't always, but I mean, the best line I have is like, I'm not going to rob you unless you pay me, right? I am not socially engineering everyone for fun. And if you want me to do a job for you and genuinely go after you or your firm, it costs a lot of money. You know, I charge a lot to do it. I don't do it for fun. And, you know, I think most people realise I'm on the side of the angels as opposed to anything else. So I'm not going to do it for just mischief. Although, there are times when there are certain things happen where I kind of go, okay, I'm not going to do this. So, for example, I had a call, actually only yesterday, about a job coming up, and I spoke to my team, and I said, right, we're not going to do it this way. We're going to do it another way. Because it's better anyway, but I don't want to do what they're asking us to do. And so the guys are going, but the client really wants this. Like they've scoped this, they've said this. I can say this, by the way, because there's just no way this client would ever listen to this. And so I just said, well, I'm telling you now, that's not what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do. And so I suppose you could say that I made a persuasive argument from a professional perspective to change the scope. But my head of crew was just like, you totally socially engineered that, so you got your own way. And I was like, yeah, but it is in their interest, you know what I mean? But there was part of it. I just thought, no, I'm gonna make sure everybody focuses on and changes their mind on this. So, you know.
Sometimes that's required, though, isn't it, to get the job done?
Just in life, never mind in work.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it is the best thing for them.
And actually, just building off of that, have you ever become aware of a time where you've realised, actually, I've just been socially engineered to do something I didn't actually want to do? Is that
Well, I have kids, so there's that. I mean, we're all socially engineers a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I suppose it depends. We use it, it's quite a ubiquitous term, but there's times when we feel under emotional pressure. I mean, I feel it in work sometimes when people ask me to do things, you know, and they're good people and they need it. And, you know, it's not really, I don't need to do it and I don't, you know, particularly want to do it, but I would feel bad saying no. You could say that that's emotional persuasion. but like in terms of someone actually I mean, honestly. So I tell you what happens a lot is I was on, I think it might have been .NET. One of the things I did that loads and loads of people outside of the industry listened to. And then I did some talks and things nearby. And there was a class the kids came to see me do one of these talks. So they were at like a cyber event. There must have been 40 from sort of age about 15 up until sixth form, right? So chatting away, and I'm doing my talk and talking about, they all want to be burglars at this point, of course. And so I get loads, selfies with them and everything at the end. They loved it and they wanted to be social engineers. Now, the last slide that I do from a professional perspective always has my contact on, like we all do, right? So it's got my social media handles, but it's also got my direct email. So in the next few days and weeks, I start to get these kids sending me these phishing emails. And bless them, I could see it's them because they don't really hide their own email address, but also there's no link or anything. There's no request. So I got loads saying, so I don't really talk much about my family, but people know I have a family. So there was things like, please can you pick me up from school? Even though my own family wouldn't know I was in America. Or... and then using the ones that I detail in the talk. So I talk about one where we say there's no caffeine or something on site. So we said to everyone on this job, there's no caffeine on site. Click on the link if you've got a problem. And so I got this is your doctor. No caffeine. And they probably had the story that you were talking about. About caffeine. So I got lots and lots and lots and lots of those, clearly off kids. And I didn't answer any of them, but there were ones I wanted to say, that was a good shot. Please use your powers for good. But that was funny,
Never worked with kids or animals, is that not what they say?
Yeah.
So from a general security perspective, I've got people in my life that say, oh, why would someone want to hack me? Or why would someone want to, try and get my information? So what would you say to people who've that sort of mindset when it comes to their own personal security?
Well, no one's too, you don't have to be rich or famous or important, whatever that means, to be hacked. We're all worth hacking. We all have identity for a start. Your identity is worth stealing. And you've got to remember that people's motivation isn't always just money. Of course, it's the main motivation for criminals is money. But for malicious hackers and social engineers, there's political reasons, there's ego, And I think what people don't realise is that sometimes it's a drive-by. They just look for anyone and everyone, and someone falls for it. And we see how far this can go. And so it's at the very least inconvenient to be hacked, to be targeted, and at worst they can take your money, your identity, and worst of all, your peace of mind. It's if someone's looking at my photographs, my emails, my texts. That is a very important part of our lives these days. In fact, it is our life. Your phone and the things on our phones are our lives. So if someone can take over that's a very serious, psychological intrusion. And so what I say is you've got to just protect yourself. Just don't be an easy target, right? Do this basic cyber hygiene, which if you try and tell anyone outside of this industry, they immediately want to fall asleep. But it's you try and do the simple things, make it harder, and, and then know what to do if it goes wrong. I think that's really it's all we can hope for in the flood of information and the tsunami of things that people need to worry about in this world is just that they realise that they could be a target and there are a few simple things they can do to make that harder. And then it's up to us as an industry to support that if it goes wrong and to keep getting the word out, I think.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned in there about the kind of psychological impact, and there's a book. It's a great book called The Psychology of Fraud by Dr. Martina Dove, which I know that you've read and have a copy of it in Loads.
Yeah, Martina. She came on my show to talk about that.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant book, and it talks a lot about not only why kind of fraud and scams work, but also the impact on the victim, and it's really quite it's quite scary, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we talk about that in culture. When we talk about culture, don't we? We talk about the no shame, no blame culture. But what we do after tests is we make sure we go back. So 2 things, a year later, 6 months or a year, depending on where they are, we'll go back and we'll do a review with everyone we hoodwinked and the senior team. And we try and check whether or not, it might just be a Zoom, but we try and check whether or not that was implemented. But what I also do is within that first year, anyone that I personally conned or the team got past with a con, I will try and speak to them directly, and I will speak to them outside of work, and I will try and find out whether they weren't punished directly, but indirectly, and away from all the social media posts about, no blame and diversity, whether that actually happened. And then if I find that that has happened, even though we have contracts in place at the start to say your employees won't be blamed if they are fooled by us, if I find, and it doesn't happen often, but if I find that that company has blamed them, even though they've said to me they haven't, if that employee has a case for saying, well, I feel like under the radar I was mistreated because of it, then I am displeased.
That's a good way of putting it.
I would not like to see what your displeased looks like. If you could give, so I think we've touched on this generally, but if you could give one single piece of advice to organisations wanting to become more secure, what would that be?
You need to know your people better than the bad guys. I can find out so much about an organisation from research, you know this, from OSINT and other things, that I can, we aim to play a target, a mark, like a violin, right? But from an employer perspective, you should know your people well enough to notice when they're upset or they are tired or when they need a break or, when flexible working hours will suit that person's neurology better than making them come in or whatever it is. If you know your people really well, you're in with a shot, right? You're in with a shot of teamwork, you're in with a shot of, awareness landing, and you're in with a shot of noticing when someone's being targeted. And that's line manager level, because some companies are enormous, right? So line manager level. If you don't, and you don't really care about those employees, and I mean really care about it, and say, it's going to cost me much more to hire someone in. So, for example, let me give you an example. There's a company I work with all the time, lovely, lovely employee who had, let's say, alcohol issues, right? Fired. Okay, so 6 months it was bubbling under. Great otherwise, but definitely needed help. Fired. Now, apart from that problem, which came from very real issues, a great employee. It's going to cost them an absolute fortune to recruit, train, and get someone up to speed on that person's job. They would have been better helping them, right? Yeah. Because now not only do they have all the cost and all the, the gap to fill and everything else, but they've not learned any lessons about how to help employees who face any issues, right? A genuine issue. They've not gone out of their way to show empathy, which the rest of the team absolutely can see. And they've created an enemy for life out of someone who knows that job backwards, right? Knows their systems, knows everything about them. I understand that these are difficult decisions and sometimes there's no helping someone. But you got to try. Now, that person now is prime to be an insider threat. I mean, they've left now, but they still know enough, Yeah. And so you've got to know your people better than an outsider can find out, And companies just don't do it. They just don't put the time and effort in. You can't throw money at that. That's cultural.
Yeah, I think that's something that's missing in a lot of businesses. That small nugget that can mean so much to that person that would just make them become an exemplary employee and do anything for you. But then that little thing isn't there, and they just
People face issues,
Yeah.
right? People face issues in life, all different ones. We all, we all cope with stress in different ways. And some people, it's not a straight path for everybody
Yeah.
and or for anybody. So, try and show some level of understanding, even if it's not because you care about the person, even just for self-preservation. But do not let someone who knows everything about you, don't be harsh and create an enemy, because I know that person's can absolutely take that company apart, no matter what we do to try and stop it.
Yeah.
So
is there one book or blog or podcast that's had a big impact on you and that you'd like to recommend to our audience, whether security related or not?
Do you know, this is such a weird question. I get asked this all the time. And one of the things that I have an issue with is there aren't like a lot of books on social engineering specifically that I would recommend, basically. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote it was because I thought there isn't the book I want to read out there. I want to read about someone actually doing the jobs as opposed to all the theory that you can find elsewhere. So that was one of the reasons. I mean, I plugged a book on another one. I don't know whether I should say it again. I do have texts that I go to. But I think the one I talk about in terms of, there are a couple of texts I go to. So there is a textbook called, oh no. Do you know what? I'm not going to say that one right now. I would just say definitely go to Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman. Definitely go to David Matsumoto and Paul Ekman's work on emotions and non-verbal comms, because it's not just about body language, it's about how the emotions affect the physiology. So for now, I would say that. I've just got two in my mind, but for the life of me, I just can't remember whether he changed the title. And if he did change the title, he would not want me. In fact, he'd be annoyed with me if I said the wrong title. And there is a nice fiction series, which is very easy to read and very funny, which is from a fellow author of mine, actually. And all his books are sort of by my books when we go in for meetings. And it's called The Good Thief's Guide. And it's Good Thief's Guide to Vegas, to London, to New York, to Amsterdam. And they are great. And they do tell you quite a lot about being a burglar. So I quite like those, but they are for fun,
Yeah.
as opposed to anything else. Again, I know I need to publish a proper list of everything I've read and recommendations on the website, but there are literally only 24 hours in a day right now.
Yes, correct. So thank you very much, Jenny, for joining us today. It's been absolutely amazing. I think Callus will agree, and it's
100%.
fantastic for you to take the time. So I'd just like to say thank you for joining us. And if you need any information about what we do at ID Cyber Solutions, you can get us on idcybersolutions.com, and we will link all of Jenny's details in the show notes. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.